The Analyser and the Stopclock both have automatic test strip modes, but they work in very different ways. If I take an Analyser, because it's a meter, it can get to a very good standard print in a very short period of time, and so the test strip modes built into it work plus and minus around that suggested exposure, because that's what you'd expect it to be. You'd expect a tolerance around the exposure setting, and the test strip modes are being used to fine-tune the exposure around that point. The Stopclock is different. Because it's a programmable timer that starts from a base exposure and then moves on, its test strip mode is different, and it's based on a standard exposure plus incremental times only, because you want the test strips it produces to support the programming function built into the unit. And so therefore, although they both operate automatically and give you f-stop increments in the test strip itself, one is plus and minus for just 7 steps in the case of the Analyser, and the Stopclock basically allows you to go almost ad infinitum, and then you can just select those ones you need and program into a programming sequence. With the Stopclock, to enter the test strip mode, you need to turn the enlarger light on. The reason for this is that you would normally place your test strip maker on the baseboard and you need to know where to put it. Having done that, to actually turn the enlarger light off and enter the test strip modes, you press and hold the store button. The word test comes on the display. When you release the button, it then tells you the stop size that's being used for the increments, and then it tells you T for test strip and the first time, which is your base time. You then make that first exposure. When it comes to the end of the exposure, it'll automatically increment up the time by the step size you're using, and it briefly showed 11.3 seconds, which is an incremental exposure of 1.23 seconds, and that'll be the second time for the second strip. Now at the moment I'm doing incremental strips, so it's showing the incremental time each time, the total, then the increment, the total, then the increment, the total, then the increment. So it's showing you the total time, and then it's automatically making a test strip in 1/6 of stop steps. If I want to cancel that, I press the exit button. It tells me the number of steps and then returns back to the standard time. If I'd change the user mode to separate test strips by pressing and holding the user button and finding test strips and changing it to separate, if I now do a test strip mode, the first time is 10 seconds, I should have set a shorter time, never mind. And then the next is 11.3 seconds, and it shows the full time because that's the time it's actually going to do. So these are separate test strips. And again, when you get to the end of the sequence, if I press the exit button, it tells me the number of steps and then returns back to the standard display. On the Analyser, doing test strips is slightly different. The test strip will hover around the 15-second display here, or if I'd set some other time, around 6 seconds. Whatever is on the display, either as a result of manually changing the time or taking an exposure reading, and the test strip will be either side. The step size is based on the step size that's currently in use. So if I press both up and down buttons together, it will be in 1/4 of a stop. And so I can make it a very fine test strip or a very coarse test strip, depending on your preference. Let's do a coarse one. Store that, turn the focusing light on, position the test strip maker under the enlarger. Now, the Analyser, unlike the Stopclock, does a fixed number of strips, and it does 7, and this is a homemade test strip maker with fingers. And I put my piece of paper under there, under the enlarger with the focus light on, and then I press the print button. Pressing the print button turns the enlarger off and goes into test strip mode, and again it's confirmed by a T and then the time for the first strip. Now it's going to hover, so the first time is going to be shorter than the time initially on the display. So it'll do the first 5-second exposure, and then as before it shows the total time, which was 6.38, and then the incremental time, which was 1.38. Again the total time and then the incremental time. And again, if in the user mode I'd set separate test strips rather than incremental test strips, it would be doing full exposures each time for each separate exposure. But the point is that the first test strip is lighter than the suggested result, and the end test strip is darker, with the middle one being the one that was on the display at the beginning. I can cancel out of that by pressing the cancel button, and it returns to the standard time that was on the display when I started. If I take a very simple reading under the enlarger and with no negative in there and do a test strip, you will get a set of light greys, with 0 being in the middle, and then -3 steps, -2 steps, -1 steps on one side, and +1, 2 and 3 on the other, gradually getting darker. So this would be the suggested meter reading, and then this is plus and minus either side. And this also is used later on as the method by which you can fine-tune the exposure setting of the analyzer so that it's calibrated for your paper and developer. Just a short word about how you do your test strips. If this was my baseboard easel and this is going to be my print on the easel, if I'm doing incremental test strips, what I need to do is make the first exposure with the whole paper and then slowly mask the paper with a sliding cover, moving it across a step at a time. And that would mean that the first part of the paper would get the base exposure and then gradually more and more exposure across the paper. Now, if I'm going to do separate test strips, I need to use a completely different type of test strip maker. And these are the ones that use Shuttered Fingers. So this type of test strip maker makes both types. You can either open all the fingers up together and you can incrementally close them down on top of the paper as you make subsequent exposures, or you can just lift one up at a time and make a full separate test strip. Or alternatively, you can make the one in the back of the book Way Beyond Monochrome, which is a bit more complicated still, that gives you the option of having separate test strips for the same part of the image, because the actual test strip maker moves along as you lift one of the fingers. So that's just a word. Some people get confused, because the one thing that you can't do with a test strip maker is do selective uncovering. You do not start off like that and selectively uncover the print, because that will give you the wrong result.